Aha, there we go.
That's right. I was actually in line with
I hereby call to order this meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee on May 1st at 6:30-ish. And today we're going to continue talking about open space. When last we left off in our discussion about open space, which we were going through the pieces on page 86 and 87 of the master plan, I believe we made it through 16 and had moved to the second page to item 17, I think. It's been a month since we met, so I'm going to try and note, and I know you will as well, for John's collation what our results are today. But if it's okay with everyone, we'll just jump right in. The first item here, number 17, says fill in the gaps of open space connecting Mount Tom and the Oxbow utilizing the TDR program. I don't know what that means.
Transfer of development rights.
I see.
That's a zoning. It's in the zoning.
Yeah, spell that, I understand it. OSCD by right ordinance and acquisition by Piscomic Conservation Trust, the city, and others. So they want to, there's gaps of open space there, and they want to use these different programs to attempt to fill it. I'm guessing what they mean by fill in the gaps is purchase private properties for use as open space. Is that what we mean?
Probably it's a combination of if there's an opportunity to get the land trust involved or something like that, to purchase a piece of land that makes sense in terms of bridging the open space on the mountain with the Oxbow. I mean that's a good goal, and if guiding other efforts that might possibly result in land being acquired for open space that would do that kind of thing as well, then that's something that we should be kind of vigilant about everything else.
And I remember at the last meeting you were telling us
this 17. Hey.
That your program, the Piscomic Trust, which is mentioned here in this number 17, is actually quite good about purchasing, but you just made a bunch of big purchases, and it was kind of a cyclical thing where, a group of purchases, even though you're always looking for opportunities, kind of settle them down, manage them, then another group, etc.
It's going to come in spurts, and it's going to come in opportunities and everything else, and there are landowners all the way down East Street that own land up the mountainside on that side there, and at some point in time there's going to be opportunities with whether it's them being the land being passed down to heirs or something like that, and then whether they're going to be kind of kept in the same mode, or if they're going to want to. What's that?
Do we know what the gaps are? I mean, are there?
Well,
do we even have open space down there right now besides the Oxbow?
Well, there's open space on the mountainside.
Sure.
There are properties already there, and the potential for more. And
there's a fair bit of undeveloped land.
Yeah.
On that sort of northern edge of the Mount Tom range.
I've never hiked up on that area. I'm always up on the other end, so I really don't know what's up there, to be honest. So,
yeah, and there's a few. I would say there's a few key parcels that.
Is this sort of where we're?
Yeah, we're talking about
the nearest part
stretch
to the Oxbow.
Yeah.
This is the Oxbow right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
anything within this, in this area right here is kind of like, the thinking there.
Yeah. Ferry Street or the Mountain View, kind of development up, I would say, because there's still some frontage along East Street that hasn't been developed. And I'd say those are the important parcels.
I'm surprised by that.
Well, I will, only because I've been privy to it, there are some parcels that are kind of like in back of some frontage parcels with narrower strips of land for accessibility in a couple of areas. And I know for a fact that Kestrel, I believe it's the Kestrel Trust, is kind of like, been keeping an eye on that and looking at other opportunities in the open space in the area and kind of letting people know about, hey,
I can vouch for that.
Yes.
But it seems like there's a real opportunity there that, and the window is closing really on some of those parcels, I would say. So
What can we do?
I think the one important thing is to get information in the landowner's hands that suggests that development isn't necessarily the only way to go with their property. There are substantial federal tax benefits to donating a conservation restriction or easement, which has been extended many times so that the landowner may not get totally what they're thinking at top dollar for the development price, but they would get some amount that was sort of between their development price and the not developed price, essentially.
Yeah, but there would be no effort, pretty much.
Essentially, and then they can take a tax credit. I think it's 8 years out for a certain, so you deduct or credit, get a credit for a certain amount every year of the value of the easement, and so to stretch it out that long can really be a huge benefit to the landowner. So, for example, stuff like that is a federal tax incentive that's very generous and has been extended several times. I think that would alleviate or help out with certain landowner situations.
What group,
for example,
would be best to take that ball and run with it?
Well, I think, as Bill alluded to, the Kestrel Trust, and
I don't know them.
they're kind of a regional. They mostly work. They're based in Amherst, and they mostly work in the farmland in Hadley and the Holyoke Range. They recently completed a huge project about 2 or 3 years ago, up in Leverett. The Jones working forest land is like the largest conservation restriction implemented probably ever in the state.
Kestrel's a bird, right?
Kestrel is a bird. Yeah.
It is.
That's all I know.
But it is, now that's different than the land trust.
The Kestrel Land Trust.
The Kestrel, okay, it is the Kestrel,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So they approached Pascomic and said, we would love to work more on the west side of the river. Please consider us a partner in conservation. And
That's awesome.
I think
Okay, that makes sense.
they have full-time staff. A number of staff. They have a very active board. And they have, admittedly more resources than Pascomic does. So it makes sense for Pascomic, as we kind of, look through our, menu or portfolio of desirable properties, to say, well, geez, some of these we could probably take on ourselves, but others, would be more appropriately in Kestrel's court, or, you know, at some point you say, well, you get the trustees of reservations or Mass Audubon involved.
It seems like you have natural symbiotic relationships with all those groups.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
You
yeah,
know,
Piscomic does, yes.
everybody works at a certain, we all have a target niche, I'd say, or ability to reach, funders or whatever to get a project completed. So, it's its own little ecosystem.
I have a couple of quick questions for you. I just want to check in on it. The first question is, you said the target window is closing.
Yeah.
Can you give me, what do you mean? And all I really want to know is, like, are we talking a year? Are we talking 5 years?
Well, I don't know, but, some of these landowners, the couple parcels in particular, there's really absentee landowners. And
Well, what I was alluding to just before you got in here, Tom, was the fact that some of these landowners are starting to pass along, these lands to the younger generation and everything else. What the younger generation wants to do with them, I mean, that transitional type of thing, either that's a point at which you can kind of start to talk to, the heirs, as
right, to try to come up with
that's happening all along there. They're just getting. We know that. Been living in the town for so long.
So now's the time.
Yeah, and then there's.
I mentioned that, Tom. It's a kind of an observation.
Yeah. So, and I guess I would be. Not to identify, single landowners or single parcels. I don't know if that's appropriate in this venue, but, it's just that conversation can never start too early. And
so I would say Vet Kestrel Trust, that might be something that we can do directly, and just try to promote them contacting landowners if they haven't already. I mean, they've expressed interest. I don't know if they've come.
I know that for a fact.
I think
that they have.
Does anyone know, this is my other question, if since this was made 2008, if there have been any handover of land to Open Trust, and if there was any progress since this document came out in that area? Is there any land that you know of in that area that's
not in that neighborhood? No.
Farther up, I mean, where they built where they did the two habitat units, there was some land that was.
That's down.
It's a little farther
down in this area here.
But it is still part of the connecting, so there has been some progress.
Let's clarify that.
Yeah, I guess, the
What was
thing
that,
is,
one parcel or two?
it's a fairly sizable parcel. It's sort of across from the Clark Street area. The thing about that is that the land that's immediately across the street is developed. So
It's open, but it's usable, it's open.
And the question is, a lot of these, the reason we're concerned about preserving these linkages now is that they provide some permeability for large mammals, largely, through the landscape. And those areas where, everything from like bobcat and fisher to bear and moose and deer, I live on East Street. I've had moose in my backyard, and watched them cross East Street, like with my heart in my throat. I don't know what's going to happen.
And Tom, this has been very. This item is pretty specific in identifying, promoting that relationship between the oxbow and the Mount Tom base, the base of the Mount Tom area.
I think that's
it's suggestive of that.
Is the logic that it's a
area.
natural sort of drinking resource, and the animals tend to go down there and come back?
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know about that kind of access to water so much as there's a large area of open land, undeveloped land here. you got Arcadia right here.
Yeah, there's no connector.
Which goes,
Okay.
it's connected through lands in Northampton and, to the hill towns. And when you're talking about moose or black bear or what have you, a lot of these animals, they wouldn't, even something as large as all the open space around Mount Tom isn't really big enough to support any kind of population. So the animals
Sort of the
are
shortest distance A to B is
Right.
the connector between the two. I see what
not only is it the shortest distance, but it's the only one basically that's not already built. So
It's the one with the most potential
Yeah.
for connectivity.
Okay.
It's the area, so.
So that's why I think, like, as somebody who thinks about sort of landscape connectivity for wildlife, just a few of those parcels are really key. And if they are developed in a way that sort of impairs wildlife movement through that area, you're not just, you just think it's just a simple thing, well, the animals can go somewhere else. In this case, they really can't. And that way, what happens is the value of all of the open space is diminished, because not only are the animals not able to move between these areas, but Arcadia is not large enough to support a population of some of these.
Is it possible to say that the threat to human life by animals crossing the roads increases as well? Am I reaching?
Well, no. I mean, that's definitely a factor in places. I think, the more that animals get concentrated into certain areas, the more, we humans can adapt to that by, putting signage up or whatever, deer crossing next half mile.
Culverts under roads, stuff like that.
Wildlife underpasses or overpasses have been employed in different places.
I definitely want to follow through this one. This one sounds like it's really important. It's something we can actually make a difference with if we move fast.
Yeah, and I guess I'd also say that, this one in particular is dealing with this area, the northern edge of town, and also say that there are still opportunities sort of more along the intersection of Route 10 and East Street and Hendrick Street, that kind of neighborhood has some undeveloped land as well.
And quite honestly, that's why the overlay, the TDR overlay, was put in place. As giving some leverage to that notion of trying to move it away from the mountainside or elsewhere. There is an abundant wildlife that seek refuge in that area.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
I guess I'd also say that as these lands are passed to the next generation, a lot of the people who've lived on East Street have lived there for decades. They have, potentially a relationship with the property the way it is, and the next generation may not have that same relationship.
Well, that's exactly, yeah.
And that's where,
They become they're more distant from it.
They're isolated.
Yeah.
And it's hard to inherit the knowledge of they're not just inheriting a property, they're inheriting a management duty in the whole area, and I think information is what's key there.
Yeah.
So let's move to the next one. Number 18, promote efforts by developers to create private homeowners associations to steward non-critical open space set-asides in new developments, with the assistance and oversight of the Conservation Commission and the Piscomic Conservation Trust, given the limited resources of such groups to steward non-critical lands. I like that line, given the limited resources of such groups.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
It's kind of a mouthful, I suppose.
Yeah. And then at one point they sort of just throw up their hands, right? So first off, what are non-critical open spaces? What makes one critical compared to non-critical?
I would say that critical lands host rare species, have identified like aquifer protection benefit, like I was talking about, provide a linkage
Riverways and that kind of stuff, right?
So give me some examples of non-critical open spaces that we have.
Well, I would give an example of like some of the forest areas that are still remaining in the sort of plains area of town.
Okay.
There are some patches of woods that are maybe 5, 6, 10 acres, whatever, that haven't been built on. It's all in one ownership, and it's not hosting any rare species. It's kind of isolated.
Right.
It's not connected to other protected open space, so it's not serving that.
Yeah.
So
When they talk about set-asides,
yeah.
that's like, promoting developments or
There was one
implementing developments
done in my neighborhood.
that have open space integrated with it as part of a critical design component or an important design component.
You're helping me. I want to make sure I understand this because oftentimes we're looking to find new ways to develop. In this case, I want to make sure I understand that what's being said here is, I think, understanding, homeowners associations to use these in ways that make it continue to be open space but useful for the developments around it, not develop it? Or is this meant to say, develop those?
Well, this is this is like a.
These would be
this
set-asides,
would be-
legalized set-asides and everything else that would be
Non-developed.
non-developed and be part of a homeowners association. They're suggesting that there be some ownership, some stewardship on the part of the developments to kind of take care of and oversee some of those open spaces rather than just kind of like heaping it on the Piscataway Conservation Trust.
Yeah.
Right, like, well, so for example, you have a parcel of land, say it's 10 acres, right? In many communities, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know if Easthampton is among them, would allow a developer to develop more densely than otherwise allowable on a particular part of
Yes.
Yeah, Tom,
Yes.
we have those options.
Great.
That they are in place and everything else. And,
I would have thought so, but I wasn't sure.
to kind of leverage denser pockets of development to save bigger chunks of open space.
Exactly.
And that's what we want to do. I mean, and to avoid developments, 10-foot wide slivers of land and everything else that are totally useless and high maintenance and a huge legal hassle.
Yeah, and I think that people in society are valuing kind of a more densely developed area that they can get to, mixed use, walkable neighborhoods and all this stuff, and having open space as part of their community is really important. So and valued by many people. So that's a good way to develop. The question is, what happens to that property? And in the town, in a lot of times in the past, Piscataway has been the recipient of some of these lands, and some of them are not the best conservation properties for us.
You'd like to see these groups help out.
And it would be...
But these are private homeowner associations. Anyone know of any of those that we have?
No.
Well, I mean, the classic example are some of the condominium
That's
projects,
what I was going
right?
to say, the
Yeah.
condo,
Yes.
there would be
I know.
condo
Right. Just
associations,
wanted to
but
get Parsons straight.
Yep.
aside from that, no.
So it says promote efforts.
I think there are a couple, Wendy, but I can't, off the top of my head, I mean, Paul Street, just a recent example, Paul Street has some of that.
Yeah.
Plus, they've actually deeded
That's-
some chunk of land to you, right?
That's my neighborhood.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
that's,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is there's no homeowners association over in our neighborhood that's dealing with it. It just went
To Pisconic?
to Pisconic.
Yeah, now there isn't a piece of that Paul Street
There's a
that
piece-
was, that's a part of the homeowners association, or is it all just?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right, okay.
There was a horse farm there. The person who bought the land to develop it, he's putting in
Is it six or seven?
six or seven houses there, and a good portion of the land, A, wasn't developable, and B,
So,
But the important part,
it's behind it, so,
Yeah.
yes, so,
Kurt, did you have a?
Well, just reading the strategy, and from this was written in 2008, I'm not sure, was there an effort by developers pushing this? That was
it? Yeah, that's the kind of the same question I have.
that
Because
it wasn't well received, or
no, I think it was a mutual benefit to everybody. That some of this, could be saved as open space. The big thing is that, getting Pisconic Conservation Trust involved in it, provided the ability for them to come in and make it a little bit more publicly accessible and usable by
So it's
the
good for
public
the
and all that
community.
kind of
Was
stuff.
it good for Pisconic?
Good for Pisconic, I think.
certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about your resources? It seems to be indicating that your resources are limited.
Well, we own the Paul Street property.
I see.
And that, there's no doubt that property is a feather in our cap. For one thing, it's allowing us to access where we had a previously landlocked parcel immediately adjacent to it. So it makes sense for us to acquire this land.
I see.
And the entry, and the access or frontage that gives us now.
Did you get some CPA funding?
Yes, yeah,
So-
it was a considerable, it
Okay.
was supported by CPA, it was supported by a lot of donors in town. The trust zone
I mean,
coffer.
that's a big thing. I mean, one of those come along every 5 years or so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's big progress. That's
It
huge.
is.
yeah.
I think for
It's
me, sort of
accessible all the way down to the
difficult is
river,
that
right?
private homeowners associations
Go
should
that
store
I mean, you can walk.
with assistance
Yeah,
and
sure.
oversight. But in this case, it's just Pisconic, and I think that's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's in any way bad.
Right.
It's just that this particular item seems to be wanting these private homeowners, unless I'm misinterpreting, to really sort of take up the banner here.
Yeah.
And we don't see too much of that.
I guess.
Well, it's another option to kind of alleviate the stress on the nonprofit organizations that are kind of buried with, and rely on, volunteerism and everything else. Well, maybe some of the developments can kind of take on some of their open spaces specifically attributed to their neighborhood type of thing.
I guess my question would be, how many of these areas exist now that aren't being stewarded in some way?
That's a good question.
And then the next question is, well, moving forward, how do we make sure that when developments occur and there are these kinds of set-asides, that people, start this kind of thing?
I mean, it's definitely, if someone were to come before the planning board with something like that, something that I will going forward try to keep my eye on is bringing up, but we need something, I think, maybe in writing, so that
Well,
we follow our guidelines.
it's a good thing for the planning department to kind of keep an eye on, or as developers coming in looking for some guidance in the planning department, that the planning department be really kind of like upfront with them and kind of, suggest some of these issues, and how they should be considered with their development or whatever,
Okay. So I'm going to go some progress, need more private associations. Sound good?
Seems reasonable.
And I almost felt like you had one more point you wanted to add there.
I don't remember what it was.
Okay, sorry.
No, I don't think it was.
I don't know, you're so busy typing there, it's like, I don't know how the heck you can keep a track on the conversation.
No, I guess I'm just thinking of a strategy then.
I think it's
I
something.
imagine
Yeah.
it's non-critical open space, you could probably come up with a pretty narrow definition for that and figure out where they are and just keep that circled off for if a developer comes in and you say, well,
Oh, it's one of these.
instead of trying to develop this, why don't you do this?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
that's exactly right.
And, you know,
It feels like it should just be as part of a checklist in the planning department. You know, oh, it's
Well,
one of those.
that's, you know, I mean, they're the one constant in this whole thing. Everything goes through that office, and whether they can keep track of everything that goes on, because, you know, there's a lot going on. And they, you know,
I guess the other thing I would say, in terms of non-critical open space, I would say that it's anywhere that's not developed that isn't, you know, previously identified as a priority. I mean,
So it's pretty much
everything, anything that's not like, you know, directly on the river or on the mountainside, or, you know, these areas that have already been sort of broadly flagged in town as being conservation priorities. Anything that's not developed that's outside of those areas would probably, you know, you could generally consider them to be non-critical open space. And, you know, and I would make the case that no matter how we're developing, we should keep these things in mind. You know, I mean, except infill development in certain places, or brownfield redevelopment,
yeah.
that, or the, you know, the old mill, whatever. That's
What's
a separate category. But, you know, in terms of looking at, you know, the remaining forests in town, or what have you, I think, you know, that to be an important tool.
All right, let's move to the next one. Number 19, rigorously utilize the existing conservation analysis requirement of residential or mixed-use open space development regulations in the zoning ordinance to ensure that it achieves its intended purpose in the future. Consider incorporating this tool into other existing development regulations.
Oh, this again.
Conservation analysis.
We look at that in number 13.
Yeah, we had a discussion about that. You were asking, well, what exactly?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
so can I just say redundant to?
Let me just make sure. They were referring to special permit subdivisions, but I think our big core issue was, you know, who's doing this conservation analysis? Where is it? What, you know, what's going on with it? And here we go, where they're saying rigorously utilize the existing. Well,
It's a
I mean,
requirement.
Yeah.
Well, it is. I mean, it's pretty clear in the zoning bylaws that developments kind of have to take into consideration some of these environmental issues, and, you know, this should be brought forward to the planning board and looked at and viewed upon as an asset to a potential project.
So ongoing.
Yeah, and you know, great. It's a little bit redundancy from that other
Yeah.
thing, but it's one of those kind of things that I guess you can't say it enough.
That's right.
You know, it's one of those kind of things, you know, and it's almost, I get back to the planning department, hopefully being vigilant about, you know, when projects are in their infant stage, that some of the stuff can kind of be interjected and kind of be, you know, reminded about, or, you know, mentioned, and as kind of an interest on the part of the city, you know, is something that, you know, again, it's like an ongoing thing, you know, as projects come in.
You're right. It's got to constantly be mentioned so that people keep it on the radar. So we'll say ongoing and see number 13.
It's also
your suggestion.
It's a requirement. People need to be aware of it.
Well, you know,
And I'm not aware of it. I haven't done my homework since
I mean,
we talked about it last time.
to me, from my professional perspective, it makes sense that if you're engaging in a conversation or a discussion with a planning board about your project, that it can be, you know, the whole process, the design, how you came by your, you know, what you're presenting to the planning board, the process, and how it took form whether it was through the site assets, the site characteristics and everything else, just is part and parcel to, that whole presentation process and the permitting process too. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. It brings everybody on board, and you think and everything else, and either they're going to appreciate or they're not, or you might have some flaws in your thought process and everything else, in which case that gets vetted in the public hearing process.
I agree. All right, let's move to number 20. Ensure that developers survey property boundaries that abut open space in residential developments and mark such boundaries with concrete markers. Incorporate this requirement into existing open space residential development bylaw. Notice how that's all caps, open space residential development bylaw.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real nitpicky kind of thing,
but necessary.
So we're talking about doing real survey on our open space.
You're talking about having developers do surveys when they're abutting open space, so that everybody's clear from the get-go that their property line ends here. Because
you've experienced a lot of that.
Well, the typical situation is that people use the open space that abuts their property for their sheds, their garages, their leaf clippings, their gardens, etc. It goes on, and it's a real problem.
And it's particularly acute, correct me if I'm wrong, where, get narrow little pieces of land that are very hard to kind of justify to an abutting landowner. Hey, you got to keep this 10-foot spot clear in the back of here. Don't clutter it up, with your occupation and everything else. This is not your land type of thing. It's everybody's. But it's tough to police it and
I can really see why people would do the leaf clipping thing too. An area like that would seem natural for people to consider their, under the rug sort of.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to combat.
I mean, except that it's not their property.
So it's obvious, but hard to combat.
It's not always obvious. So, which is why marking them with concrete.
Okay, so this is a requirement.
Makes sense,
correct?
Well, I guess that's the question. It says incorporate this requirement into existing.
It says this requirement.
Yeah, and it may not be specifically, in a bullet or a line item that open space shall be marked, clearly marked with boundaries and everything else. So it's a combination sometimes when they identify property line corners. That becomes clear to the landowner, but what isn't clear to the landowner perhaps is what they abut, and that the property line corner also represents another common boundary to another, piece of land or whatever.
So it would seem to me the wise precaution here would be to attempt regular, almost annual mention to the planning board, the planning department, just to kind of keep it on their radar so that if these things come in, if there's more development, that we mention that there's a requirement for a survey.
I mean, if this is part of something that would get interjected into this section, the OSR section of the zoning bylaws, and we all know that it's someday, if Jessica has her way, that whole zoning bylaw is going to be revamped. But some of these things, will get thought of and be incorporated into that.
So let's say
I would say that.
we don't have little progress. What's less than some? Minor, minimal progress, something along that line, and possibly add to bylaws and note to planning department. That's a lot on that one, so I'm just going to say minimal progress.
Right, Tom? I mean, that's...
Well, Pascomic has spent tens of thousands of dollars on survey and hundreds of hours, locating and monumenting our corners in several of our properties. It's an ongoing.
And the main reason for that being?
Encroachment.
Encroachment, yeah.
Well, let's head on over to 21. Explore creation of an incentive program whereby landowners can legally protect open space using conservation restrictions and subsequently qualify for a tax abatement on those lands. Explore the creation for incentives.
Well, that's a funny thing because the incentives are kind of built in.
Didn't you say already that there was
Yeah.
one that's been continued regularly? We have them, do we not?
It seems to me that if you're applying a conservation restriction on a piece of property, you are removing the development rights. The taxable value of that land would no longer, it wouldn't be taxed at the potential buildable
Yeah.
rate anymore. Highest and best use would then be open space for that
Yeah.
portion of the property that was
So
restricted.
you're saying inherently by doing this, you automatically get a benefit.
Well, that's my understanding, so I'm not,
Plus, you also
Well,
mentioned there are other tax breaks.
I guess
Like,
this
it's
is
like APR, are they talking about maybe like APR land and,
Let's look
you know, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I guess I would.
And that's in place already, it just
Yeah.
needs to be, you know,
Is this additional incentive?
I'm looking, you know how
Because
they
if it's additional incentive,
expand on their intent here.
then there's no harm in, a landowner donating a conservation restriction is probably not going to get, the top dollar because they're carving off, in their pocket at the time of the transaction. Because they're carving off the development rights.
So they say city officials are responsible. They need state, non-profit conservation organizations, Department of Revenue, and that's it. So I think what we have here is ongoing, maybe. I'm not sure that's exactly ideal. Or it could even be completed because we have it already. But I hesitate to say completed on something like this because we're always looking for new ways.
No, but it says explore creation of an incentive program, and there already is an incentive program, so in that respect, it is complete.
Except if they mean an additional incentive.
Yeah,
I guess what I'm saying is that you can never have enough incentives for telling.
That's why I hesitate
and the
to
thing
say
is,
completed, you know.
yeah, and the thing is, there may be other incentive programs that all of a sudden crop up. We have no idea, there may be some funding that becomes available for, preserving some land or else.
Let's go with ongoing on that one.
It's a kind of thing that you're just vigilant about.
Yeah.
It's,
Keep making opportunities happen.
yeah.
Number 22. Continue and strengthen homeowner education/awareness about the importance and vulnerability of the Barnes Aquifer, particularly in residential areas over recharge zones. Review existing applicable regulations to ensure they support stated goals and purposes for aquifer protection. Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, that's another one of those.
Okay, homeowner education and awareness. Well, we get our annual water report, right?
Yeah, we do.
That's my personal education, plus I know Michael, so I get a little additional education. But,
Right.
Well, this will be ongoing, I think, and.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Barnes
This will
Aquifer
be a
committee.
Aquifer committee,
Yeah.
so-
Yeah, there's constant vigilance again over that area of town.
all right. Establishing an agricultural commission. Enact a right to farm bylaw and or create an agricultural land overlay zoning district that would mandate cluster developments and preserve prime farmland. Do we have an agricultural commission?
Not that I know of.
I'm trying to think.
I
I've
don't-
never heard of anyone trying to set one up. You think of anything?
I thought there was, but I might be thinking of.
There is a couple people who steward the community garden.
CSA?
No, the community garden on Park Hill.
Oh, okay.
But that's not the same.
I
That's
think
not
that,
an
I don't
agricultural commission.
look at that as the same thing.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Hesitantly, I want to say no progress. but I'd like to vet that. This could just be out of all of our expertise.
It's not in mine.
So,
But what is a right to farm bylaw?
well, it's an agricultural commission, and then they want them to enact a right to farm bylaw. I don't know anything about a right to farm bylaw. I can tell you that. It's not something
Yeah.
I've seen in the bylaw section, although I do tend to concentrate on the sections for special permits. And, you know what I mean? So,
I'm not sure what that means either. I think there has been a lot of effort to try to preserve some of the farms still left in Easthampton for sure. We know Echodale, we know the one down on East Street and everything else, and they have received some financial help to try to preserve those now.
But is the right to farm?
Yeah, there's a.
I don't know, I have no idea what, right to farm.
No.
Does that mean you have the right to grow tomatoes on your land, or?
Or to the right to grow to have a half a dozen chickens in your yard, and is that right to farm?
no, I mean, that was an added little benefit. I mean, it could be considered
but
as a
I'm just
benefit.
I'm using that as an example. Of right to farm.
I can't imagine that. I shouldn't say no inherently. It's just that my instinct tells me that this is something bigger that was intended here. I can't say with certainty.
You got something for us?
Well, there is an agricultural commission.
There is?
They're recruiting for people for an agricultural. So there isn't a.
Okay.
Well, see,
There's a vehicle in place that.
Discussion stage.
Well, Craig, that's a perfect example. None of us are aware really of the activities of this commission and everything else. I mean, heighten the awareness that there is one that exists and everything else is.
Okay, so
I don't know.
There is one.
discussion change.
At least on paper, there is one that exists.
That's
Whether it's
interesting.
active or
Did it
not,
mention
I don't
who's chairman or?
I was just saw the vacancies, but I'm trying to find where the actual boards are.
Well, there's vacancies on every.
No, I know. So,
So it's not.
Why don't we just get rid of all denoters, discussion stays, ongoing, all that, and just say vet ag commission? And we need to contact them and find out. That's what we need to do.
They would know.
Agreed? Disagreed?
That's interesting.
Okay. Vet ag commission, which I have no idea how we'll do that. I'll ask Jessica what she started on. Number 24.
I'd like to know what their mantra is, yeah.
What they're up to. I know, that's a meeting I'd like to attend at least one for, I mean, we don't have a whole lot of farmland, but it's valuable what we do have, so it's an
And some of it's in areas where, we've identified wholeheartedly that have, great important scenic views and everything else, so there's a combination of there's an overlap of a lot of different attributes in there, some of the farmland that we have that's left that
there
kind of add more, teeth to it.
It doesn't list who the chair is, but there's 5 people on it.
Super duper.
That's a nice group. Okay, yeah.
All right, so we're going to vet with them for more information. I think maybe we have time for one more. Number 24. Utilize existing government agricultural protection programs such as Chapter 61, APR, and others.
Here we go again, Tom.
Ongoing.
I'm on Chapter 40R.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyone know about 61?
What about it?
What's that?
What about it?
Well, it says to utilize it. Agricultural protection programs. No information on Chapter 61? Let's see what it says in the back here.
What's the current use?
It's kind of an ongoing thing, huh?
Chapter 61 allows a landowner to get a tax reduction based on an existing use of the property. So there's Chapter 61 for forestry, Chapter 61 for agriculture. If a property goes into Chapter 61, the landowner doesn't have to pay as high a tax bill because
They give up basically their development rights on it.
No, what it does is it gives the city right of first refusal
Right of first,
on the
okay.
property should it change hands. The thing about Chapter 61 is the landowner is essentially in the program at will, and can withdraw at any time.
So it's like a half.
But he's
step.
obligated to pay the back tax, the
Right.
taxes
So if you
that
get out-
he was benefiting.
Exactly. So if you withdraw before the property changes hands, then you have to pay the back
Liability.
taxes.
Got it. Well, that's a neat program.
So yeah, it makes a lot of sense for.
What's the one with the development rights I'm thinking of, Tom? Or maybe I'm thinking the same thing with this,
Yeah,
but
not sure.
So it says to utilize these existing government programs, protection programs. I have no idea if anyone's using Chapter 61 around here.
There are a few Chapter 61 lands in town.
Some progress.
well, yeah,
They were probably in place before the plan was developed.
right. And like what's been observed in here, I mean, there's not a heck of a lot of land left in Easthampton that's,
Yeah.
that has that potential anymore. I mean, some forested land, but it's also in areas that are rugged enough that they're pretty much undevelopable anyhow. Would be very, very difficult to develop.
I think what's important is to get information into landowners' hands that these programs exist. So if they're considering this type of land use, they realize that there are several incentives for keeping their land undeveloped, essentially, that they can take advantage of.
I think that it's becoming clear over the last several items that one of the things I need to do when the planning board next meet is to ask to get an item on the agenda to discuss public education or landowner education. Send out a pamphlet or 2 or 3 that contain information about Chapter 61 or a reminder about open space use. I think that an effort like that, maybe it's an annual effort, maybe it's a biannual or something along that line, would be something that would be helpful to the community and something the planning department should be able to manage.
And I think
that big of a budget to do.
your allies in that are going to be the UMass Agricultural Extension. UMass Extension has done a lot of work on putting together really handy informational booklets, pamphlets, whatever, for different options like this. So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Well, we just got through 24, and all we have left are 25 through 29.
We could do them in the next 5 minutes.
Do you think we can?
Why not?
I'm game. We've got 2 minutes. But I'm game
Bill's watch says we have to.
for one more. Identify areas where vegetated riparian areas are lacking and work with landowners to restore such areas. How did I do on that word?
Great.
Riparian? Yeah.
Riparian?
Yeah.
This is new to me. I have an extensive vocabulary, so.
I mean, it's,
What are we talking about?
well, basically you're talking about wetland areas that are adjacent to rivers, riverfront areas, that kind of stuff.
Riparian specifically refers to areas along streams. Yeah, streams, rivers. So any lands
lacking.
Right. So what that's suggesting is that you have a stream that's flowing through somebody's property, and there's essentially, no vegetation or just lawn right next to it. And what that does is when there's a storm or whatever, without deep plant roots and so forth in the area, it tends to cause more erosion. And certain farmers, maybe this isn't. I'm not aware of places in Easthampton where it's like this, but if you're growing corn right up to the riverbank, it's not great. Or if your cattle are just meandering down into the river, that's not great.
Right.
So you want to get those uses away or out of the river.
Well, clearly it's ongoing, but it also seems to me I can't imagine there's a group out there looking for this right now.
Right.
Now, there is some protection in place, as I, was starting to allude to through the Wetlands Protection Act and, the riverfront areas, that kind of stuff.
But specifically, I'm not sure that anyone is looking at identifying where vegetated riparian areas are lacking. That would.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't that sound like a monumental task, Tom, to go through the city of Easthampton here and identify, that, but...
the Mass.js aerial photos from are really good. And and I don't know if Easthampton is in the most recent batch, but say from 2008, 2009, you could get a really good comprehensive look at all the rivers in town, and from the aerial photos, identify where streams are that.
And who would do that?
Well, that's the question, I guess. I wouldn't be interested.
All right, so
Those kind of things that, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission have a little bit of a hands-on experience with doing, but they
so
get involved in
ongoing-
municipalities and doing
Ongoing
land use studies and everything.
use aerial photos and needs leadership. Sound good?
Sure.
Is it even a problem?
I don't know what the extent of the problem would be in Easthampton.
That's the thing, is that without looking, this just says to identify areas.
Yeah. I think, with respect to new developments and everything else, the planning department might steer them into identifying those sensitive areas and maybe offering a little bit of protection to those areas, from the developments, buffers, and open space areas. And
If someone comes before us and they have a stream on the property, I'll certainly be asking about it going forward.
But you've already got, Wetlands Protection Act
yes, right.
involved too,
Yeah.
if you're dealing with a perennial stream, especially.
So there is some protection in place, through some state laws and everything else.
I'll stick with ongoing use aerial photos and needs leadership. Well, technically we're done. We got 4 more. I'm willing to bang through them. What does the group think? Kurt, you in for a little bit more?
I think it would be unfair to force my guests to come back another time.
I agree. Although I would love to do it because I enjoy hanging out with you guys. You're my favorite guests in this committee. You make
They're the only ones, right, Tom?
so much more pleasant. I love hanging with the group, but as guests go, you're top notch. Number 26. Improve, maintain communication between city officials and others concerned with open space protection when opportunities/threats arise.
Yeah, that's an ongoing, to coin your phrase there, it's just ongoing and,
There's anything else to it.
yeah.
27. Amend existing bylaws to permit and encourage the use of common driveways to reduce impervious surfaces in residential developments. The use of common driveways.
Yeah.
That's multiple people, multiple land properties using one driveway as opposed to everyone having to have their own.
Correct. We do not have specific bylaws for that.
No.
I've used it extensively in Amherst and in Northampton, and they have fairly extensive requirements for design of common driveways, but they aren't necessarily discouraged. They're kind of encouraged as a planning tool to reduce, the amount of roadway.
Yeah.
Public ownership of roadways, infrastructure, and that kind of stuff.
So
they can make an area a little bit more affordable too.
And I know
That's a good point.
there are, I can think of the house that we used to live in. There was another house behind it, and the owner couldn't sell just one of the houses because the other one didn't have separate access to the street. So there's nothing that allows for common driveways in this town.
Really? No easy.
Well, yeah, it may be something that, perhaps there's a bylaw developed for.
Well, I think we should say add to new bylaws.
Yeah.
It sounds like there are models out there.
Yeah, and they're used pretty good. I've done, I don't know how many of them over at Northampton and everything else, but, they require turnouts, stormwater mitigation, and, all kinds of stuff, so.
And the new
It's not a big deal.
Good. All right. 28. Continue to reuse the existing mill structures and other pre-existing structures for new development as feasible.
Ongoing.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of progress.
That's an easy one there, too.
Yes.
Yeah. Ongoing,
Well, that's ongoing, but it's also, I mean, it's having some smashing success.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, all of them are being kind of worked on in some form.
I've even had many successes, although one ferry would be.
The Ferry Street is the
Better
only
than
one
my
that
cab,
seems to
yeah.
be a little, it's
Yeah,
still a little bit waning and everything else. I don't know what's going
It's
on
too
with
bad
that there,
And
yeah.
the longer they leave it open, the worse it gets, so that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
Last one. Strive for consistency of design for those areas adjacent to 40R parcels. Consider adoption of design guidelines to achieve this. Consistency of design.
Help me out there.
Well, it's like a
Developer?
context type of thing,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, are we talking
Adjacent
about?
to 40R parcels.
Yeah.
I mean,
We've got some 40R parcels now, right? We've got them.
But that's single-family residential.
Yeah.
In the 40,000 square foot category, is that what 40, I believe that's 40.
Well, I assume they meant the chapter 40R start. We're talking about smart growth and stuff like that, right? Let's double check.
that would
Yeah,
be
that's-
That would be 40, that would be 40B.
Maybe I'm misthinking. Maybe got the wrong 40.
unfamiliar with the terminology.
All right. Hold on. Let's see what they meant.
I'm reading that as the 40R zone district in the city,
Not chapter 40.
well, it's not chapter 40R, it's 40B, isn't it?
But there's an R too that goes up.
Oh, okay, so I'm gonna have to be a little more
Yeah, we'll see.
educated on that.
We can see if,
I'm not sure if
if they've
that's,
got a specific section here, but I'm not seeing it. Just trying for consistency.
That sounds like ongoing to me. It's striving for consistency.
Okay, let's hear when they're talking about, when they're,
Page
here's,
77?
yeah, it says, continue to reuse mill structures and utilize Mass Chapter 40R, so they're,
Oh,
so.
that's for smart growth. The smart growth, okay, all right, okay. Yeah. Well, that makes, I mean, okay, so that makes sense to me, that the smart growth design techniques should just be for one little isolated parcel and then, you know, somewhere else in town, you know, that should be carried kind of consistently through everything and,
The smart growth we have,
you know, be introduced consistently in all projects, but
I think has been fairly consistent as far as I know. I mean, I don't,
So far?
I don't see anything, so I'd go on going with that as you wisely, sagely suggested.
It's a curious phrase. That you're,
Isn't it?
that you want to be consistency of design for those areas adjacent to the parcels. that are being
Yes,
developed.
Oh, that's interesting.
yes, so
It's a
if you got 40R, then, if you got 40R parcels, then you don't, right next to it, say, have a McMansion on an acre.
Correct.
and
That's
then
right.
Another
That's
McMansion
right.
on
When
the.
you- so that's a contextual type of thing. And 40R is something that's more in the denser parts of the town, like in the village center areas and everything else. Now it's coming back to me, and so you don't want to have a 4-acre estate next door to it and everything else. It's just totally out of context, right?
Yes.
I'm really not sure what else to put there other than ongoing. I have very little information on how those juxtapositions are being managed.
It seems like with a community as built out as Easthampton is, how much opportunity do you have to be choosy about how the adjacent parcel is developed? You know,
I mean, it's probably, you're right, it's an
The
ongoing
expectation
thing.
is only strive for consistency.
Right.
You don't have to achieve it.
Good point. Good
Yeah,
point.
and as opportunities arise through development proposals, then there's a point at which you can kind of like, you know, look for that consistency to take place. It's got to be an ongoing thing.
Today, I think more than any meeting we've had, I've got a lot of things to bring back to the planning board, which is great. Thank you so much for helping us close out this section of open space. But wait, there's more. Now, we won't deal with it tonight, but I'd love to invite you, I know the look on your face. I'd love to invite you all back for one more meeting, because when we began this process, we said, let's start with what's in here and talk about what progress we made. But I think that we would do an injustice to this well-designed document if we didn't find out what's new in here, that's not in there, that really should be something that we bring to life. And it's not our job to rewrite the master plan, but it is our job to kind of mention the pieces of new.
Those are my two favorite subjects.
Okay.
What can I say, you know?
So my hope is that when we schedule the next meeting,
Do we have to, is that, can you send that, email that to us, that document,
It's
or?
online.
Do we?
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's online. If not,
I remember to have,
I will absolutely email it. But
we might have that, I might not, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's
I've
on the
got a
city
couple of documents
website.
in my iPad
Yeah,
right
I
now, I
think
don't know.
it's in the city website.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay, because I can look on there. Really, you got, is that where you downloaded?
Yeah, and then at work I just, is that on?
Yeah. That's all right, no, I can do the same thing in my office too, yeah.
Okay. So, if we could do just one more, that would help us, because I just think we did really good work, but there's more that we can do.
Now, who is the author of this particular document
I
right
know
here?
Harry Schumann was a part of it,
I was on the committee.
and you too, yeah? There you, where are you?
And Capra and Jessica wrote most of it, and from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission before
There
she
you are, Tom. So
So you know all about this then?
So I can ask Tom at our next planning, or I'm sorry, right there, Tom, Harry at our next planning board meeting, maybe he'd be willing to attend too. You guys are certainly the experts on this and have helped us a lot, so one more push and hopefully we can put that to bed.
I have to read it. I mean, I didn't. I'm kind of behind the curve here a little bit.
It's a great document.
Yeah.
It's really well done, and I think that I'm personally grateful that I had it to use through this process, and more people should be aware of it.
It's probably underutilized.
Well, so is this. That's why we're here, right? So, maybe we can do a little justice by picking it up under our wing a little bit and pushing it. 2 weeks from today?
The 15th?
Yes, the Ides of May, if I dare make up Ides. So I will see you then, 6:30, same time, same place.
I got it. It's piqued my interest. So the next meeting is when again?
2 weeks from today, that'll be, I think you said the 15th?
15th, May 15th.
And that's Thursday
Always Thursday,
at
6:30 in this room.
Should we ship this thing?
Yes, please.